What is leadership? You know, I see a lot of videos on TikTok and on YouTube Shorts about workplace drama. And a lot of these videos involve, a boss, some sort of manager or supervisor, calling an employee into his or her office and then saying, "Hey, we have a huge project that's due by this Friday. And I'm sorry for the short notice, but I need you to stay late after work, for the next 3 days and finish this project. And by the way, you're not going to get any overtime for it. You just got to do it because I'm the boss and I'm telling you to." And in a lot of these sketches, in a lot of these skits, that I see on YouTube Shorts or on TikTok, the employee stands up for himself or for herself and says, "This is your problem. Like, you did not give me enough advance notice for this project. It is unethical and illegal for you to ask me to stay late in order to finish a project, and I'm not going to do it." Okay, for some reason, those kinds of videos are extremely popular. Anytime we imagine ourselves in that scenario where our boss, gives us sort of unethical orders, I think just hearing that and, imagining ourselves in that situation, it spikes our heart rate. It can spike our blood pressure. And then, watching this employee, stand up for themselves can really, make us feel empowered. It makes us feel like, if that were to ever happen to us at our job, then, hopefully we would have the courage to stand up for ourselves and not be treated unfairly. However, I've been thinking a lot about, like, what if something like that were to happen to me? And, the reality is I feel like if my boss said something to me, like, "Neil, we have an urgent project and I need you to work extra, to work late, for the next 3 days in a row in order for us to finish this project," I might actually agree to something like that. And why might I agree? I guess the reality is because I feel like my relationship with my boss is actually really good. Okay, my boss is someone who, always has my back, who has everyone's back at the workplace. And my boss is the kind of guy who, anyone can go to him with problems and he'll always be accommodating. He'll always be understanding and he'll always be incredibly empathetic. So if I was in this scenario, number one, I feel like if this happened to me, my boss would phrase it differently. He might say, "Neil, there's a project that I forgot about. I really dropped the ball on this one. I should have told multiple employees about this, over a month ago, but, I forgot to write it down. It slipped my mind and now I need you to stay late and do extra work in order to cover my ass." Okay, I feel like that's what my boss might say. He might put it all out there. He might be willing to be vulnerable and actually say, like, "This is my mistake." I might think back to all the times where, my boss had my back, where he was willing to, look out for me. And for that reason, I might agree. Okay, I feel like, that relationship is very strong, where this entire thing is related to the concept of an emotional bank account. So in all of our relationships, whether it's with our coworkers, whether it's with our supervisor, whether it's with our subordinates, whether it's with our romantic partner, like our boyfriend, girlfriend, our spouse, there is an emotional bank account. And, when you are kind, when you are compassionate, when you are trusting, when you are loyal, you make deposits in this emotional bank account. Okay, the emotional bank account is kind of like a savings account. Okay, and when you put money in a savings account, that money is there when you need it. If you are in an emergency, you can always, withdraw money from your savings account. My boss has deposited a lot into our emotional bank account, into like the relationship account that I have with him. So, if it's time for him to make a withdrawal, like if he's saying like I really need you to do this, then I'm going to be willing to do that. Asking someone for a favor, especially a very serious favor, that is a withdrawal on an emotional bank account. It's not something you want to do every day, right? If you have a friend and you just ask them for like a huge favor every single day over and over again, then you're withdrawing more from that bank account than you're depositing. And eventually the bank account is going to go negative. If you're asking your best friend for a huge favor every single day for, 30 days in a row, then, eventually that friendship is going to crumble because you've withdrawn more from the emotional bank account than you have deposited. Okay, what does this have to do with leadership? Well, leaders have these emotional bank accounts, these relationship accounts with all of their subordinates. And the subordinates themselves are also, contributors to this bank account that they share with their supervisors, with their bosses. So it's a two-way street. Supervisors need to make deposits into these bank accounts and subordinates need to make deposits into these bank accounts. And both subordinates and supervisors will have to make withdrawals when the time comes, like when it's necessary. Imagine if you just need a mental health day, right, from work. Like, can you call your boss and say, like, "Hey, boss, I know I didn't give you any advance notice, but I can't come in today. I'm just not feeling it." Okay, well, whether or not you can do something like that and get away with it depends a lot on what kind of relationship you have with your boss. If you're someone who's consistent at work, who demonstrates integrity, who demonstrates accountability, who communicates clearly, if you have all those traits and you've demonstrated those traits over a series of months, then, you might have enough capital in that emotional bank account. And if you need something like a favor, if you need a mental health day, or even if you need like 3 or 4 days off, if you've made enough deposits into that bank account, then your boss will likely say, "Yeah, go ahead, it's fine. Like, I understand. Like, I know you wouldn't ask me for this time off, if you didn't really need it. So yeah, go ahead." What you created a lot of trust in that relationship. These traits that we mentioned, integrity, communication, accountability, competence, consistency, they are the principles of leadership. But is it only supervisors that need these leadership principles? The answer is no. It's also subordinates who need these principles of leadership. And why is that? If you are a subordinate and you do not demonstrate these principles of leadership, then your boss is never going to trust you to really work unsupervised. Right? If you're not consistent, if you don't complete your work sometimes, if you lie about things in the workplace, which is demonstrating poor integrity. So if you don't have good integrity, then your boss is always going to have to be looking over your shoulder. And most bosses are busy people. They have more responsibilities than they have time. So they don't want to be looking over your shoulder. Like, they don't want to be like constantly checking your work all the time. Okay, but they know that, if something happens, then it's on them. It's a boss's job to take accountability for their subordinates. Some people like to say that the world is divided into leaders and followers. And that's absolutely not true. That's a gross oversimplification of the way the world works. Everyone in every job is going to simultaneously be a leader and a subordinate. They are going to have people that they supervise, and they're going to have people that they have to answer to, people who supervise them.